over here. Get my t-shirt below. Guaranteed to raise your charisma by at least +1.
We count down the worst players ever today on Dungeon Craft. Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor DungeonMaster, coming to you from beautiful Dungeon University, wearing my +1 tweed jacket of insight. And this channel is about playing the ultimate game of D&D and other tabletop role-playing games.
And I'm Deathbringer. Level up your game by subscribing and hit the bell icon so you'll be informed when we upload new content.
Recently, I asked the members of the Dungeon Craft Facebook group to help me write an episode of the show, and I posed this question: who are your worst players ever? And boy, was I deluged with responses. Hundreds of them, and I read every single one of them, and I tried to separate them into categories, and I came up with 8 broad categories. I'm going to be counting them down today in order of toxicity from the least to the most toxic. I'm also going to share my insights into how to handle these types of players, if they can be handled, because I've encountered just about every single one of them on multiple occasions. I did do a video called The 10 Most Annoying Player Habits, which I'll include a link to at the end, but this is more about the type of player that is badly behaved. Now, I'm excluding rules, lawyers, and min-maxers from this list because I see them as a natural byproduct of the game. The more rules and rule books you produce, the more you are going to produce rules lawyers and munchkin-type players who want to exploit those rules. I also excluded players who habitually arrived late because there are some people who are just rude, but oftentimes work gets in the way and people arrive late for a number of reasons. These are people that their behaviors and their personalities are so toxic they could actually torpedo your whole game. So, with that in mind, here we go. Number 8, the perpetually unprepared. These are the players who don't come with the basic equipment like pencils or dice, and they haven't prepared their character sheet in advance, and they don't know the rules, and they don't know which dice to roll for what. I don't mind these players so much because I understand that different people have a different level of interest in the game. Some people are kind of like casual players. They just play because their friends are playing, and they view it as a social engagement, and they don't want to get into the rules or the minutia. I totally get that, and I don't mind those players. I don't mind saying to someone, look, roll a 15, this is the die you roll, as long as I can do all the math for them. The problem is when these types of players are given spellcasters. Never give this type of player a spellcaster. It will just slow the game. To be a spellcaster, you have to have a thorough knowledge of not only the spellcasting rules, but all of the rules, and you have to be able to make decisions quickly. So that is my advice, especially if you're new a game master. Do not give spellcasters to this type of player because the unprepared player will only hold up the game. Number 7, the Spotlight Hog. These are the players who play the role but at the expense of everybody else, and they hog up too much of the game master's time. There's a subcategory called the side quester. These are the characters that like to go off on adventure on their own, whether it's a rogue scouting ahead for 20 minutes or being in an urban environment and going on a little adventure to buy a pet or whatever. Now here's the thing, the Spotlight Hog is oftentimes a very good role player. They're the type of players that get really into playing their character, and they do the funny voices and accents. And you kind of want a player like that in your game. You just want to make sure that they engage with the other players. So after the game is over, never during the game, make that suggestion to them. Say, look, I really like your roleplay, but I want you to engage the other players in some of the things you're doing. And you can't just go off on a side quest for 10 or 20 minutes. Another thing you can do to alleviate this problem is to have players take turns, not just during combat, but with whatever they're doing. Like if it's roleplay, we go clockwise around the table, and each player gets a minute to tell you what they want to do. That assures everyone gets a chance to play at the table. Number 6 is the Mood Killer, and this entry is from Lindy Beige. Lloyd over at Lindy Beige has a great channel about not just role-playing games, but a lot of historical stuff and stuff about how real medieval weapons worked. So definitely check it out. But his vote is for the mood killer. This is the person that pops the balloon of atmosphere with some sort of joke or Monty Python reference when you've spent the last 10 or 20 minutes building up to this moment. It's really distracting for a game master. I think it's a lot more difficult to build atmosphere in a role-playing game than it is in a film, because in a film, you have part of the social contract is everyone's going to be quiet, and you're in a darkened theater, and they've got music and everything is timed right, and it's very challenging for a game master to do that when the player breaks that atmosphere with an ill-timed joke or by taking out their cell phone and saying, hey, look at this cat video. It is super annoying. This is one of the most annoying habits to me as a game master because I spend so long trying to get the atmosphere right. So the best thing you could do with this player is, again, after the game is over, take them aside and say, look, that thing that you did, just knock it off. You have to be very specific and really call them out on it and explain to them how hard it is to build the atmosphere, and you'd appreciate it if they just didn't do that. That's the only way I can think of to sort of handle that player. Next is the time waster, and these can take the form of various types of activities, like another Lindy Beige pick, the player that demands to know the exact number they need to roll with all the calculations before they actually roll the die. And by the time you work it out and you say it's a 16, they just whiff and roll a 2, and you could have just avoided all that if they would have tossed the die first. Other time-wasting techniques include the players that have to stop to look up spells, or the players that have to talk through every possibility. These people exist in board games too, and I hate that. It just drives me crazy. Like, take your turn and move on. Again, I don't think these are critical problems, but they definitely demand that a game master address it. Again, you have to say, if you're going to be a spellcaster, you got to know what your spells do and be able to make a decision very quickly, because otherwise everyone else is waiting on your turn, and that is boring. Another great possibility is sand timers, which I use on a number of occasions. You can get them for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They're commonly given in games like Categories, and just turn the sand timer over and say, look, when this sand timer runs out, that's the end of your turn. Look, if it works for Categories, why not Dungeons and Dragons? Number 4 is the micromanager, aka the control freak. These are the type of players that like to tell everyone else how to play their game. And if he senses that the players are doing something not optimal for the game, he gets really annoyed with them. And this is really frustrating because it takes away from player autonomy. The reason why we play these games is so we can make our own decisions about our own characters. And the other problem is the player doesn't get, at least my game mastering style, which I view the game as a collaborative effort between the game master and the players. I am not their adversary. Now, sometimes the players may win, sometimes they lose, but I am not against them. I am trying to create this story with them. Sometimes players make decisions that might be suboptimal because that's what their character will do. And that's one of the annoying type of players that I left off the list. The person that says that's what my character would do. I know a lot of game masters get frustrated with that, but the thing is, sometimes that is what your character might do. Like, I have a character who is in love with one of the villains, and he just can't see how evil she is. And for that player, that is playing the character, and people might get frustrated and say, you're trying to screw things up, we're going to lose the game. But that is the player creating a character that is flawed. And flawed characters are more interesting. But when you do confront this player privately, don't talk about yourself. Instead, frame it in terms of the other players. And be specific. Say, remember when you told Michelle that she should cast this spell? In the future, please don't do that. Allow her to make her own decisions, even if they're not optimal. And just play your own character. You have to speak to them directly. That should solve the problem. And now we come to the toxic top 3. The previous types of players, I think there's a little room to negotiate with them, but these types of players, oftentimes they can't be fixed, and you have to ask them to leave the game, or just not invite them back. So number 3 is the arguer. These players don't just argue about the rules as they're written, they will argue about rules that are within the Game Master's prerogative. For example, how many hit points or hit dice does a troll have? And if they have too many hit points, they say, trolls shouldn't have that many hit points. And that fails to take into consideration that much of the game is the Game Master's prerogative, and you could have a really boss troll. Others demand, where does it say that in the rules? But just because something isn't written in a rule doesn't mean the Game Master can't override it or make up their own rule. I don't know what to tell you. If you're in my game and you are too argumentative, and I would venture to say even slightly argumentative, I may tell you one time, look, knock it off. But as Benjamin Franklin said, a word to the wise is enough. If you don't get it and cause any grief to me at some other time, I'm just not going to invite you back. My favorite chapter in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is nobody wins an argument, but you especially don't win it if you're a player in a D&D game. The Game Master is the Game Master. They win every argument. Number 2 is the emotional blackmailer. They're the player that cries like a baby when things don't go their way, or they threaten the Game Master. Like, if you kill my character, I'm not going to play again. To which I say, good riddance. If everyone in Fleetwood Mac is replaceable, everyone in your game group is certainly replaceable. I am not dealing with emotional blackmail. There are some people that just don't get the idea that sometimes bad things will happen to their characters, and characters may even die. Here's the thing. This is a game. The dice should decide the outcomes, which is why I always recommend rolling your dice in public. So if I say, look, natural 20, and I roll double damage, or the monsters win initiative, they know I'm not fudging, and that's just the way the dice broke. But some players just can't take the thought of losing, and they'll just kick over the Monopoly board or take all their pieces and go home. To which I say, good riddance, don't let the door hit your on the way out. And finally, the number 1 most hated, worst type of player is the cheater. Hiding dice, palming dice, dropping dice, giving yourself extra hit points or extra spell slots. I hate cheaters. Like, how old are you? I've heard of people that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s and giving themselves extra hit points. Come on. How do you not know that this is a game so you can lose, and the possibility of you losing it is what makes the game fun? Sometimes you can catch the cheater directly in the act, like when they're trying to palm the die, say, no, I saw you roll that too. But a lot of times you can't catch them, but you know they're cheating. And here's the thing, if you confront them, they can become indignant and say, no, I wasn't cheating, that's not true, which is why I just wouldn't invite them back to the game. Players that don't understand that this is a game and what makes it fun is that you could possibly lose just don't belong at my table. And a lot of times, unless they're a kid, unless they're a child, 15 or younger, those are people that can be corrected. But if we're talking people who are 25 and older and they're still cheating, get lost. The good news is problem players are more replaceable than ever. Virtual tabletops mean a new player is just a click away. And the popularity of Dungeons & Dragons means you probably know someone who's interested in playing the game that's never played before. And it's my experience that new players are usually a lot of fun because they don't know the rules and they're not going to argue with you and they're just excited to be there. These games should be fun for all players, and Dungeon Masters are players. We spend a lot of time preparing the game for everybody else, so the least they can do is get along and cooperate. And if they don't, it's time to cut the cord and move on. At least, that's what I think. What do you think? Share your ideas in the comment section below. Also below, you'll find a link to the DungeonCraft Facebook group and Patreon, where you can download a copy of my house rules called Deathbringer, as well as a link to my module Macbeth, available on questgivers.com. And for more great DungeonCraft tips, click right over here. I'll see you soon. May all your rolls be 20s.
Deathbringer again! I'm writing my own book on how to deal with players. It's called How to Skin Friends and Belligerent People. Until then, order my t-shirt in the DungeonCraft store to let your players know you're not taking any of their crap.